This is The Premise, and I'm your host,
Chad Thompson. Chad Thompson's the host.
I'm the host. I'm Jeniffer Thompson.
And I'm Chad Thompson, the host.
Today on The Premise, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Gloria Chance, an holistic and peak performance psychologist whose specialty lies in creative and expressive arts, as well as organizational systems. She is the founder of the Mousai Group, a creative experience company whose work focuses on shifting minds in organizations, groups, and individuals. Dr. Gloria is also a co-host of The Blend, a web TV talk show focusing on women's health. She is an educator and the co-author of The Female Factor, a confidence guide for women. Dr. Gloria, welcome to The Premise.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh my gosh, we're so excited to have you here. I've been looking forward to this interview. I know we've had it scheduled for a little while, but I'm just so excited to kind of dive into this idea of imagination and creativity. And I mean, Dr. Gloria, you have such an impressive background in corporate America. I mean, a former CIO and business executive in healthcare, banking, technology, and energy. I want to talk to you about, what was the catalyst for shifting your focus, going back to school to get your PhD in psychology, and really focusing on creative arts and imagination?
Jennifer, I often speak about being this brown little girl running the streets of Brooklyn back in the 70s. And part of the way that I survived was by being very creative and by using my imagination. And so ironically, that translated, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. And that translated for me into a college degree. While it wasn't focused on creativity, I was the college degree was in business and business and computers. Back in the time when computers were new in terms of the computers as we know them today, and women and minorities were not a part of that movement. And so I became involved in that and found that there was a lot of creativity in computers, especially trying to figure out how they worked at the time, because I was in the phase of introducing desktops on the computers right after the mainframe age. So that tells you how old I am. And so everything was new, everything was exciting. And my role was to help people understand it and get there. And so that was the beginning of my transition into the business world using creativity. And as I rose up to become a chief information officer across multiple industries, what I found out was emerging technology became a thing for me. And in that space, there's nothing but creativity. Most startups are always looking for the next newest technology. So I became involved in that space. And that led me to wanting to understand, well, how does creativity work in our brains and in our minds? Because I wanted to replicate it over and over and over, not just for myself, but for individuals and organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. I never thought about that before, the idea of how it really is a creative area, even though you're in healthcare or banking or technology. There still has to be the creatives behind the idea of launching it to begin with.
Well, my concept, though, in my work is that we all have the capacity to be creative. It's one of the gifts that we have, the unique gifts that we have as individuals. However, it gets beaten out of us at around 2 years old when we're being asked to conform. When people are teaching us, well, this is how you're supposed to walk and how you're supposed to sit and you're supposed to say please. And all of those things, while they're important in the function of growing up and being, sort of existing in society, it actually impacts us in a very negative way because it kind of stamps out our ability and it doesn't really give us permission to be outside of a box.
Yeah. In your work, you talk a lot about deeply embedded patterns. That's kind of what you're speaking to right now.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, speak more on that.
Yeah. And so what happens is, okay, so we get our creativity and imagination kind of stomped out and we say, this is the way that we do things. And so in general, what's fascinating about some of the work that I do or the research that sort of drives my work is that this fact, which I think is really important. In a day, we have approximately 60,000 thoughts. And of those 60,000 thoughts, 98% of those thoughts are we have the day before. So they're the same thoughts every day, 98%.
Whoa.
And then 80% of those thoughts are negative. And so that starts to create the pattern. And the pattern is that we become robotic because we think the same things. We don't ever change what we think. And we don't even realize that that's what we're doing. And then we're negative. And so that, negativity doesn't really bring us anything, right? Other than keeping us with the same thoughts that we have. And so that creates a pattern of roboticism as well as just sort of not thinking. And so in creative thinking, most people who think creatively only use up to 10% of their creative minds. And so my goal is to get people to expand their creative thinking so that they think more unique thoughts or new ideas daily. So you have to push yourself. You have to push yourself to not do the same.
It's like a muscle, it sounds like.
Exactly. It's a muscle, for sure.
Huh. There's this line about the power of imagination on your website, the MousaiGroup.com, that it really resonated with me. This idea, what is essential to creativity is the invisible inside us. I love that.
Yeah, and the invisible can be a number of things, but what it really is all of us are seeking to find meaning in our lives, right? No matter who we are, even if we have a disability or whatever, people want to feel that we all have something inside of us that we could call passion, or it could be our soul's calling. And that carries and drives us towards what our life purpose is supposed to be. And that's what's invisible to us, because many psychologists and different cultures and religion believe that when we're born for a purpose, and we're born knowing what that purpose is. But back to my earlier point, what starts to happen to us when we're two, we're worried about, or we're told to conform. And so suddenly what we knew when we were born gets further and further away from us, right? It gets buried down inside of us. So that's what becomes invisible, is who we are and who we're supposed to be. And so getting back to our creativity allows us to express and to pull in the thing that we're supposed to be. And so the invisible becomes visible.
Part of me thinks that, maybe it's just as simple as giving ourselves permission to be creative. But I wonder if it's deeper than that. Like we have gone so far away from it. Like, how do we get back there?
Yeah, I think permission is one of the things, but the challenge with permission is that all of our systems, our work systems, our life systems are built to make us conform. So therefore, creativity becomes something that either you have to be conceived as being special, like you're an artist or a celebrity.
Right.
And so then it's like, okay, well, they're creative, but I'm not. And so we built this system or this world that says that creativity is something different and special outside of us, or that belongs to someone else, or we have to do sort of this work that we don't love in order to maybe get a chance to be creative. So we don't bring creativity to the table as a part of our whole self. And so when I talk about being a holistic psychologist, I'm really interested in helping people understand their whole selves, because when you can do that, then you can be creative.
Do you think that businesses, because you work a lot with the corporate environment, do you think that these corporations are embracing the idea of incorporating more art and creative thinking into the workplace? Is there a shift happening?
Yeah, there definitely is a shift. I mean, you can see, like, I just did an interview on work-life integration, which is different from work-life balance. And what work-life integration is in corporate America is a holistic approach that allows individuals to bring what their passions are, to marry their passions with their work. And so they can bring their whole self to the workplace. Things like introducing stress management and mindfulness techniques, people being trained in resiliency and empathy. Those are all more of the soft skills that are skills that in the research and in my work are drivers of creativity. And so if you look at, there are IBM studies and other big studies that say that creativity has become one of the top 5 important leadership skills and skills that organizations will need to thrive.
Awesome. Yeah, that's kind of exciting, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, I've done work with executives around using drumming to help them get sort of their rhythm, integrating sort of leadership development processes along with drumming. I use comedy and different creative modalities as well as other traditional ones to help people build strategies. Because what happens is the way that our creative mind works is that if we're told to be creative or we know, then we're going to kind of, sort of shut down. But if you are trying to work through a problem and you introduce something like music or drumming or even something physical like dancing, what happens is your mind starts to relax and it forgets what you're there to do. And so it makes it easier for you to engage in an activity with a more open mind when you have something like an activity, sort of moving your body and your mind together. So you get a better outcome, you're more relaxed, and it's actually more fun. And that's when we can start to have creativity or the mind to open and shift in a way that we need to bring in something new.
Yeah. I'm a writer and I take a lot of writing classes. And sometimes they'll bring someone into the room who does this similar to what you're talking about. Like one time we were blindfolded. We had to touch something or smell something or taste something and write about that experience. And I always have this reaction initially where I'm very negative to it. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. And yet I force myself. I say, oh, I'm going to do it, but I'm not happy about it. And it must be something ingrained in me, one of those patterns you're talking about from my childhood, because at the end of it, I'm always so happy I did it. And my mind is opened to other possibilities. And I'm always like kind of shocked at what happens, like what I find is available in there, And
that's so fascinating what you just said, because you're right. Most people, not all, but most people initially are like, oh my God, no, they're going to make me do
this is embarrassing. Right? I'm not going to dance.
And it is, back to your earlier point about permission. You have to give yourself permission to be open to it is the first step. Yeah. And I think that also the repetition of it. So again, if we have 60,000 thoughts and 98% of them are the same, you can see why your mind is fighting that new thing, right?
Totally.
Because it's like, hey, wait a minute, I haven't been thinking about this. And so the key is what I like to do is have people embed these things into their culture, because you're right. If I wait and do this once a month, every month, I'm going to be challenged with this same thinking and people being closed to something new and open.
I just had this lovely idea that once a month, I should force myself to go out and do something that makes me uncomfortable. Or it's like outside of the purview of what I would normally do.
What about once a week?
Oh my gosh. Now see, that's like,
entirely too much. That's madness.
How am I going to find the time for that, right?
That's like, I got to on this. No way.
It does remind me of the producer Brian Eno in his studio would often have like a deck of cards. And on this deck of cards were just like things that he would use to get the musicians inspired. So he'd be in a studio with David Bowie and he'd say, all right, this isn't working. Grab something out of the deck. And it'd read something like, play an instrument you don't normally play. Or, everyone switch instruments, or just like all these different things. And it would take everyone out of the comfort zone. And then you end up with
something amazing,
with something that's potentially magical, right?
Oh, absolutely. And this whole concept out of comfort zone is really kind of an oxymoron, because actually when you are in your creative flow, you are in the zone. You are in the place where you're supposed to be. But it's uncomfortable because we haven't been allowed to be there. But what you're experiencing is your true self. I mean, one of, believe it's Anderson and Adams says that transitioning to one's creative self is the major transition in adult life. And
Wow.
so it is something that we are seeking, that we are desiring, that we're wanting that level of freedom. But because we haven't been allowed to do it, it feels like it's out of our comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting, like the correlation between, and you talk about this too. You have a workshop called Psychologist for Artists about shifting mindsets from stress and creative blocks to expanded creative capacity. And that's the correlating stress and creativity and how maybe one can offset the other is very intriguing to me.
Well, there is a fallacy in in the artist world that creativity requires stress, right? You look at people like Miles Davis and some people who have struggled either with mental illness or any kind of substance abuse or whatever, that I need to do that because that expands my creativity. Actually, those are really two separate things. But because what creativity does need usually a constraint. So a lot of times you are at your most creative when you're under the gun, right? Because creativity really is a problem-solving tool is what it is. Usually when you're being creative, you're either trying to create something for a purpose or a goal or to solve a problem. And so generally creativity, the reason I stress reduction in creativity is because if you can remove the stress, then you can get to the positive side of you, which is where creativity really resides. And so part of, again, that helping people not be so negative, positivity and creativity not only creates individual creativity, but it creates what we call team contagion. So if you're working with a team and you have someone who's very positive and emotionally available, then that actually becomes contagious for others. And it increases collaboration, and collaboration, obviously increases ideas and creativity.
Yeah, see, those people just repel me.
Really?
Just overshares and always positive.
Trying to hug you. Well, no, actually going back to, what you were saying about there's this fallacy that you have to be in a dark place to be creative. Maybe what happens is we're no longer complacent. If we're in a state where we're depressed or things are bad, maybe we're more likely to tap into that creative side because we're otherwise hopeless. We have to in order to survive.
Well, actually, when you're depression, I mean, the true sense of depression is more where you are lethargic. You don't have any initiative to get anything done. And so that's why I'm saying it's a fallacy, because depression is a total opposite of that. You may, there are times that you can, again, depending on why you're depressed, it can end up being a creative event. But for the most part, depression and creativity aren't two things that work together because of the just what happens in the brain with depression.
Well, maybe it's more hardship.
Yeah, hardship is it. Because I think about my mom, we grew up very poor. And so because of that hardship, my mom, who I didn't graduate from high school, we walked around and do window shopping, and we'd say, "Oh, Mom, I like that, but I like that dress, but can you shift this pocket or do whatever?" And she'd go back home without a pattern, create that outfit with the shift.
Wow.
And she did that for 4 girls for our entire school year, all of our years up through high school. And so that's an example, that's a perfect example of the hardship and how creativity functions so she wasn't depressed about it. She used the hardship to push the creativity through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and in cultures where there is an oppression, people find more creative ways to speak their mind and to create their art.
When I did research on, I did a film short on growing up in the inner city and going to the School of Performing Arts, and I did it with my friend Vanessa Williams, who is an actress. And we both, and I talked about how I used my creativity to go into business, and she used hers in the traditional kind of entertainment route. And what I found in that, in doing that research, is that, to your point, that when you are disadvantaged, particularly minority children, that they are the most creative overall children because of that disadvantage.
Right.
And having to always either be creative to get their minds off of something really horrible, or, to be imaginative because, they didn't have money to go on vacation, so they had to create a vacation experience, those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I grew up incredibly poor, poverty stricken, but we were very rural up in northern Idaho and eastern Washington. Yeah, and we didn't have toys. We didn't have the things, even television, electricity for a good portion of the time. But we weren't bored. We were never bored. And nowadays you see kids who have everything available to them and they're constantly bored. And I just think that there's a correlation between having too much and not using that creative muscle.
But think about it. You're right. If everything's given to you and all you have to do is sit down and move your fingers, then you're not really exercising a whole bunch of muscles, especially not the mind. Yeah. And I think that we are definitely seeing in the research in psychology that the brains of people who were born in the past 10, 15 years they've changed. The makeup of the brain has shifted because of the very fact that you're talking about with, the children who are born only knowing tech, in this technology age, they don't even have skills that we have, like knowing how to write in cursive, knowing how to write an actual letter. Right. I mean, these are very serious issues way beyond creativity around how technology has shifted the brain and shifted the way that we relate to each other, et cetera. So that's a whole nother podcast.
That totally is. Yeah. Well, even just remembering numbers, when I was a kid, we remembered all the phone numbers we needed to call.
Well, for sure. I mean, right? I barely know my phone number, so exactly. I know exactly what you mean.
I'd like to talk about your workshop, A Walk in My Shoes. A Walk in My Shoes deals with the idea of shifting marginalization to hope and reimagining race and gender oppression. And, we're at a point in our culture where this is so needed. And I wonder, how this workshop, how it's being received, and ultimately where you came up with it. Where did it come from?
So I'll start with where did it come from? And I'm thinking back and I don't really know. I create, so I've always been, so I created the first mobile application for banking. So I put the banking on the phone and I got the most powerful woman in banking award for that. And I created through like this really crazy WordPerfect processor way back in the day, the first electronic medical record, which is important in healthcare. It was so big that the company I was with, the healthcare system, did a spinoff company to go out and do this electronic medical record. So I'm saying all of that to say that I create. I understand systems and I come up with something that's needed. So I honestly can't even think back to when I developed that. But what's even more fascinating to me about the workshop is that I integrated a bunch of different creative techniques in the process. So we're talking about a really deep thing around diversity and oppression. I mean, this, creating the timeline that goes all the way back to 1776, all the way up to today, and capturing those events.
Talk to people about the process of what it looks like to take that workshop, A Walk in My Shoes, and how the digital piece comes into it.
Well, right. And so in creating the digital piece where, in our minds, we actually think in images, right? And so we really don't think in words. Our stories are in images. And so my idea is around the image, and the work that I do with the Getty Museum and art is like you take it. What image attracts you and what in your psyche is calling to that image? What is that image trying to say to you that you need to hear, that is trying to come forward inside of you? So I use that approach, and this digital timeline houses throughout, I don't know, that's over 250 years or whatever, of information around videos, letters, newspaper articles, or whatever about the topic. And so you choose an image that's speaking to you on this digital timeline. And when you click on it, you get to spend time about the historical perspective of whatever that event was. So if it was about lynching, let's say, then you, as the reader, would actually get educated and read stories about that event. And then you're asked to, after you read the story, which is really key in psychology, is what in that story evoked emotion in you, strong emotion. What was a part of that story? And from there, once we get the answer to that emotion, then we dig even deeper. We get you to then step back and write about, as if you're in that person's shoes, to write about that experience that that person might have been going through at the time from your perspective, but with that emotion. And from there, you get to act it out, write a poem, sing about it, or whatever. And you do it actually in the audience with your peers. And then the final piece is to say, because this is what always happens in psychology and happens in creativity, is you were drawn to that and you were emotional about that because there was something inside of you that needed to be revealed. And so then we bring it back to you. So you learn a lot about another culture, about the oppression, but more than that, you learn about yourself. And that's what I'm always seeking to have people do, and to do that through creative modalities.
It's so cool too. And I have to tell our listeners, I did take this workshop about a year ago, I think, and it was an incredible experience. And you did. I think there was maybe 10 of us, and you transported us back in time, this guided experience. And I was personally called to Rosa Parks. And I remember this, it was incredible. I had this shift in feeling, where I was writing from the perspective of Rosa Parks. And at first, speaking of being uncomfortable and doing something that makes me uncomfortable, I felt really uncomfortable, almost like, who am I to presume that I could feel her feelings or experience her reality? But as we continued, this shift in me was just deeply rooted in this emotion. And I felt this wave of feelings that really surprised me. It was incredible. And I'll never forget it, and I appreciate it, and I thank you for those moments. I still tell people about it. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. I would recommend anyone who has the opportunity to take the workshop. It's called A Walk in My Shoes with Dr. Gloria Chance.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The response has been amazing. When I've done it internationally at a conference with, a larger crowd, it has been, we needed more time to decompress because it can be very emotional.
Yeah.
I mean, people really go deep in this experience.
Well, and you walk out of it feeling like not only the people in the room, but the people who they, like for me, yes. I tried to walk in the shoes of Rosa Parks. And I feel like I walked away knowing all of these historical figures on a pretty emotional level, because when we take our own emotions and our own experiences and walk in the shoes of that historical figure, something happens.
It does. And I never even thought about it from the standpoint of it's almost like a history lesson, because I learn a lot also. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that Japanese did that, or we did that to them, or whatever. It is pretty fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I left, I felt like I wanted us to all have a Facebook group and stay friends forever. Like, I didn't want to lose that connection.
Been a bad business model. I have definitely fallen asleep on that one.
Well, there's still time. How often do these workshops take place? How would people find
they really
one?
are by request. I mean, okay. I do what I love to do with salons, which are in people's private homes or private facilities where it's manageable. You mix it with dinner, wine if you want. Those are really the best because it's such a personal.
It is,
yeah. So I love to do those. So, obviously at your festival, I'll be doing it this year, but usually by request. And I have a number of other workshops that I do similarly that again bring in the creative aspects, depending on the goal of the people I'm working with. I strive to make sure that I reach those goals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and you have a lot of really cool workshops that you offer. And I know you also do retreats.
Yes.
Talk to us about I want to talk about the active creative thinking too, because I know that's one of the specialties of the Mousai Group.
Mm-hmm. And then, did you say active?
Active creative thinking, this idea of creating new patterns and employing, active creative thinking.
Yeah, and so one of the work that I do around mythology. So mythology, personal mythology, is about again you understanding. So we all have stories that we tell ourselves based on the trauma that we've had, and we all have trauma. Whether it is when we were young and someone did something as simple as steal our bike, or it could be trauma of sexual abuse, that extreme rape. We all have it, and so when we're young, in order to overcome that trauma, we create a story in our minds. And the story around the bike might be, well, you know what? I'm 3 years old. My bike is missing. My parents didn't really say anything about it, but I just know it's gone. So the story could be something like, my bicycle was stolen and no one cares. So therefore, the story of my life is that, I have to do everything on my own because I will care about me and no one else will, right? Because you got the impression that, because there wasn't care given about the bike, nobody cares about you. So you basically go on to build your life based on that story. And that's what creates patterns. And the reason the patterns are there is because usually you were so young and you didn't realize that story, that trauma, was embedded at a cellular level into your unconscious. And usually that story, that kind of sense of that pattern is passed down from your ancestors. So that sort of concept of non-communication about issues or, not being empathetic enough when someone goes through something, those are patterns that you inherit that actually drive your life. And until you go through this process that I have around personal mythology, you don't really understand the patterns. So you get stuck in this place. And that's why I talk about peak performance and next level, because until you break through that pattern, like we all have it, right? Some people have a pattern like, I always get into, let's say, dead end relationships, or I always get into, a work situation where I never get promoted. All of those things are actually not just things that happen to you. They're your patterns, that they're you setting up your patterns. So personal mythology, that whole approach that I use helps you understand what your story was, your first story was, and you break through the patterns so that you can get to the next level because you broke through your patterns.
I think people are afraid to break patterns.
It's a lot of hard work. It is not for the faint of mind, that's for sure.
Right. Which is, I guess that's just life in a nutshell. But if only we could just break through these patterns and, tap into our creative imagination, and life would be so much better, right?
Well, it would be because, again, what creativity is simply, it's not acting, singing, dancing. It's not really any of that. It's that. And it's ideas, but it's much more. And what it really is being your authentic whole self. Right. Because when you are your authentic whole self, you become more creative because you're open and you're looking and you can solve problems easier because now you have all of these possibilities in front of you versus, I only do it this way. Because Einstein says that, and I believe this, is that you cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created those problems. So if you think the same way every day and you created that problem and now you're going to think the same way today trying to solve the problem, well, you're going to get this sort of mess, right? Of just circular thing of, I tried to solve the problem, but it didn't work. I tried because you're doing the same thing over and over. So creativity gives you the freedom to be able to live a more expanded life, a more abundant life, because you are in the flow of expanded thinking, which gives you expanded opportunities and possibilities.
Right. God, that's huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you had one piece of advice that you could give our listeners, something that they could do to really expand in the way that you're talking, what would it be?
So I tell people, just start out simply. And I'm really serious, Chad, that if you could, seriously, like one time a day, do something different. And it can be as small as take a shower in the dark. If you use the light, like I don't use light when I take a shower, so I should turn the light on. Just doing something different, because it shifts your brain. Your brain actually realizes, oh, this person's doing something different. Like, take a different route to work instead of just driving on automatic pilot.
Right.
Like, do the opposite of what you normally do, and you might be surprised. Like, if you always say no to something, say yes. You might, get an opportunity that you didn't think of. Really small things. So that's my advice: is do the opposite of what you would normally do, and start there and see what happens. And once you see some of the sometimes it feels like a miracle happens when you choose something different. But through either those miracles or different experiences, you'll start to say, hey, I kind of like thinking out of the box or doing something that I wouldn't normally do, and make it small so that it's safe. And then as you start to get your wings, then you might step out and really get brave and do something even more big.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great advice. I take a shower in the dark too. I thought I was the only one. I'm not the only one. That's really funny. The idea of, we were talking about the festival, and Dr. Gloria is going to be teaching the Walk in My Shoes workshop at the San Diego Writers Festival. And it's an incredible opportunity for people. I just want to remind people that it is free. And the whole impetus for the festival is this idea of storytelling and a way of creating community and empathy for one another. And you mentioned empathy just a little bit ago, this idea of, tapping into something different and nurturing empathy and, love for, I think it's not just for others, it's for ourselves, it sounds like.
For sure. We can't get enough love nowadays. And again, I hate to keep harping on this, but if up to 60,000 thoughts a day and 80% of those are negative, then we have work to do.
We do.
And I mean, if you really think about it, it holds true, because we tend to go towards the negative in general. We tend to be judgmental. And when we're judging other people, we're really judging ourselves. So we're not even kind to ourselves. Forget about other people. We're the worst judges of ourselves, and we have the worst. If you could get a transcript of what's going on in your mind and what you're thinking, you will find that it's very negative about yourself and about other people. So I think that, again, shifting and training ourselves away from and just being mindful, the whole movement around mindfulness is so critical, because mindfulness we're supposed to stop and pay attention to what we're thinking. And if we can pause and do that, and then when it's negative, shift it, then we start to move towards being more empathetic. But, the thing I worry about with positive things like being positive and empathy, and I think Chad alluded to this earlier, is it can come off as really irritating, especially when it's not authentic. So when you're positive and you're empathetic because you truly have joy inside of you and you're excited about something, it doesn't turn people off, because it's real, and people know real. We know when something's real. So I think we have to be really careful about, some of these more softer skills, because, we tend to, as a society, just to go, okay, this is the new phase. Let me put a stamp on it, put it in front of my face, and now I'm off. And that's not real. And so I think that's, how I think about the empathy and all of those more positive sort of behaviors.
So what do you say to someone like me who is his entire life used those negative thoughts as armor to protect him against what other people would say?
But that's what we all do.
Oh.
That's what we all do. And isn't that a sad world? Because we're all protecting ourselves from the very same thing. And if you know that, then you know that if I came to you, Chad, and let my armor down, chances are you might let yours down too. But someone has to be brave. Someone has to do it first. And that's why my workshops are so effective, because I invite you in and allow you and give you permission to let your armor down, and to know that we all carry it, and it's okay to let it down, because when you can let it down, that's when you can be yourself and learn about others as well.
This just made me think of something, a little flashback. When I was taking the Walk in My Shoes workshop with you, there was this moment in time where you had everyone in the circle turn and look at the person next to them and literally just stare into each other's eyes for what seemed like an eternity to me.
Uh-huh.
And I remember I was like, "Oh my God, I don't think I can keep doing this," because it was like staring into someone's eyes really is a window into their soul, more than I ever realized until that moment. And it was this man, this older man who I didn't know, and we're staring into each other's eyes in this incredibly intimate moment. And it was alarming, it was insightful, but it was also really brilliant on your part. Talk about getting people to let their guard down. Like, you don't have a choice when you're staring someone in the eyes like that. Like, your armor just disappears. You don't have any armor.
Yeah, and that's a concept called soul gazing. And and Chad, thank you for bringing that up, because it really is an opportunity to open up new doors of intimacy with whomever. It allows you to communicate on a deeper level, and so what you really are doing is you're communicating to another person's soul through their eyes. And this is a very ancient tradition that allows people to open up and and just to feel more comfortable within themselves. Although it is, to your point, a very, very uncomfortable feeling and an unsettling feeling. But in that, you actually get a chance to feel what it feels like for once to be really, truly vulnerable. And I would say, Jeniffer, if you and Chad have not done soul gazing before, seriously, if you haven't done it together, do it. It requires 2 minutes of gazing in each other's eyes. And especially as a couple, as a romantic couple, it can work wonders.
I would say we do it all the time.
Okay, there you go. Well,
I would say we stare into each other's eyes.
That's why you've been together for so long.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little intimate with all of our listeners, but welcome to our podcast room.
That's what I tend to do. I bring out.
Let's just go there, right?
I bring out what's not being seen right now. Invisible.
But yeah, we've always had that connection from the start, I'd say. And I mean, I have memories of staring into your eyes, Chad. Especially when you asked me to marry you.
Oh,
there was more gazing than there was talking in that moment.
Oh, that's so amazing. Okay, so you cannot delete this part from the interview.
Okay.
I am the editor, though.
Chad's the editor, yeah. Well, Dr. Gloria, I would like to know if you have any books that you're working on that we can look for in the future, coming days or months.
So you mentioned the female factor, and I also have a new book that I'm authoring that's coming out this month, unless there's some issue with the with the virus, and it's called The Professional Woman. And what I write about is what I call the humanist leader mindset, successful thinking strategies through the stages of your career. And so what I talk about are 3 stages in a woman's career, or it really is anyone's. And I kind of connect it to the things that I experienced and then how I handled it. And I give exercises to help women in that stage to understand where they are and how they should be responding and preparing in their career. Mm-hmm.
Give us the title one more time.
It's called The Professional Woman. And my chapter is the humanist leadership mindset. Nice.
And I have to say, I would love to read your memoir. You have such an incredible story, and especially, growing up in Brooklyn and everything you've overcome, and you're just such an authentic, warm, kind, loving individual. I think your memoir would be amazing. I don't know if you have plans to write one, but I'm just going to, put out a little request. You do.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it should have been done, but, my challenge is I have so many things that I do that I was trying to figure out, well, what's going to be the book that best, describes what I'm trying to do. And then in the end, I keep coming back to, well, just talk about what you've been through and start there. Mm-hmm. So I am going to start there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been wonderful. Such a good reminder for us to tap into that creativity, to give ourselves permission to do that one simple thing, switch things up.
I'm going to shower with the lights off.
There you go. And I'm going to turn them on.
Exactly. And you know what? Be your whole authentic self. That's the main thing is, just try to find a way to be whole in terms of understanding who you are.
Yeah.
Don't let that little small part of yourself hide. Just
Absolutely.
dig deeper and find out about it.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, Jeniffer and Chad. Chad, you are a delight.
All the 20 words I've said.
Yes, but I totally got them. They were very profound. So.
That's Chad.
Exactly. Well, Jeniffer, thank you so much also. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely my pleasure. Thank you. You can learn more about Dr. Gloria Chance at the Mousai Group. That's MOUSAIGROUP.com, where you can learn more about her workshops and her retreats, and also follow her on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. This has been another episode of The Premise. Visit us online at thepremisepod.com. Follow us on Twitter at podpremise, and subscribe and rate wherever you get your podcasts. Until next week, thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Are you an author with a story to tell, but you're just not sure how to get that story out?
Guess what? You don't have to do it alone. Marnie Friedman is an incredible writing coach. She offers personalized support and expertise to guide you from a kernel of an idea to completion. Visit marniefriedman.com to learn more. That's MarniFreedman.com.
This episode is brought to you by Monkey See Media, a small boutique design firm offering award-winning websites, book cover designs, book trailers, and photography services.
And full disclosure, we love what we do. Chad and I founded Monkey See Media in 2004, and we're still going strong.
Visit monkeycmedia.com. That's MONKEY, the letter C, media.com to see how we can help you promote your book, build a powerful online presence.
What else you got, Chad?
Let's see. We've got the San Diego Writers Festival. There are many writers. And they're a proud sponsor of our Premise podcast as well.